When fishermen go out fishing, they have a process they call catch and release. Sometimes they'll catch a fish, and the fish is either not large enough, or it's not what they wanted, or they simply don't want to keep it. It's not the right time for them to keep it. They don't want to clean it, they don't want the responsibility. For my piece, I've entitled this Catch and Release. It's about timing and how timing has a funny way, fate has a funny way of making the timing be just right. In May of 1987, I was a low-income kid living on the east side of Des Moines. I was a senior in high school with a junior boyfriend. Things were going well. I planned to graduate in the middle of May, attend DMAC in the fall, and eventually transfer to the University of Iowa. So I did what most senior girls do. In their senior year, in the spring, I attended prom. Prom was what every high school senior wants it to be. We dressed up, we looked glamorous, I had a boyfriend that I adored. Several weeks after prom, I missed my period. It wasn't unusual because as a teenage girl, I often skipped a month or two. So I waited until I missed it in June. And then I got a little nervous. I was too poor to afford a pregnancy test. So I went to my local clinic, unbeknownst to my parents, and asked for a pregnancy test. The results came back immediately. I was pregnant. I was single. I belonged to a family that didn't make much income, and my boyfriend was still in high school. First thing I did was deny it to myself. I went several weeks before I admitted it to anyone. The next thing that happened was I grew a knot in the pit of my stomach with fear about what this would mean to my family, to my boyfriend, and to my community. My aunt had been trying for years to give birth to a baby and had several difficulties in conceiving. My first thought was, I'll give this baby up for adoption. I'll give it to my aunt. But then I remembered. She had just gotten a positive result from her in vitro and was expecting twins. My parents had raised me to be pro-life, and I felt pretty strongly that I couldn't be responsible for ending of a life. So I thought I would go ahead and have this baby. So I asked my obstetrician, what does a girl do that wants to give a baby up for adoption? I didn't know much about things. I was fairly naive. So the first thing that the obstetrician suggested was that I go to Lutheran Family Services. I didn't know about that social service agency, but I was a born and raised Methodist. So I thought that you had to be a Lutheran to get that kind of help. So I said, no, that won't work. I said, what else do you have? He said, well, I have Catholic Girls Charity. Again, I'm not Catholic, so I turned him down. He then pointed me in the direction of an attorney that I could take a bus to in downtown Des Moines, which I did, and we set up a private adoption. My only request was that whoever adopted this baby be a nice, normal, middle-class family that belonged to an established church. The next step was telling my parents, my grandparents, and the young man who was the birth father. My parents were uneducated people from the wrong side of the tracks. My dad worked in a factory and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. There was a lot of abuse in my household. My father was an alcoholic who was physically abusive to my mother and my siblings and myself. I couldn't imagine bringing a child home to that environment. My mother offered to adopt the baby herself. I didn't think that I could do that to a child. Selfishly, I kept thinking about, what does this mean for me? How do I get out? How do I get my education if I'm stuck with a baby? The young man that I was dating was from a well-to-do family. He was embarrassed, fearful and sad. He told his parents, but made me promise not to tell his grandparents. That pregnancy would break us up shortly thereafter. We were the product of a teen pregnancy, simply overburdened by the responsibility of that. But in May, we simply dealt with the shock, and I made appointments and made the decision to give my baby up for adoption 9 months later. Fishermen have just moments to decide if they're going to release what they catch. For me, it took 9 months. 9 months in which I made every prenatal visit. 9 months in which I broke up with my boyfriend and started dating somebody new. 9 months in which my life got put on hold, college got put on hold. My parents asked me to move out of the house, and I had to arrange housing. I spent 9 months waiting, and on February 9th, I went into labor. After a chaotic ride to the hospital, I called in my support system. Those were mostly teenagers. My girlfriends came, 2 friends who were male, and my sister, none of which were over 18. They gave me the best help they could, told me to breathe. They had seen it in a movie once. Nurses came and went, but no family members came. I had broken their heart when I said that the first grandchild and first great-grandchild, first great-niece, was going to be given up for adoption. The labor was long, and I was too afraid to ask for anything for the pain. At midnight, they rolled me into labor and delivery, put my feet up in stirrups, and told me to push. I had a girlfriend by my side who was a little squeamish about anything about childbirth, but held my hand and told me I was going to be fine. My baby was born shortly after midnight on February 10th, 1988. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, I gave away my heart. When you give birth in the state of Iowa, you have 3 days to wait before you can sign a single piece of paper. Monday was Valentine's Day, and the lawyer said to meet at his office at 9 a.m. We needed to bring 1 witness. So I brought the boy that I was dating at the time, and the birth father and his mother came to a lawyer's office where we shuffled papers. Like leaves rustling across a forest floor, we signed the pieces of paper. We initialed here, we underlined there, and we were told that we had given away, we had released our baby, and she now belonged to someone else. And as I walked away, my one foot going in front of the other, my heart broke. And I knew Valentine's Day would never be the same. And I knew that I would need to get far, far away to accept the loss of this child, because my parents had already told me unless I changed my mind, I wasn't welcome there. I did heal. I did move on. I did go to college. I did get a college degree. I did escape the cycle of poverty that I was born and raised into. I got away from physical and mental abuse in my home, and I created a life. But I always remembered, on Valentine's Day, I gave away my heart. On the day after Christmas, in 2010, the telephone rang. I picked up the telephone, and the voice asked me if this was Sherry Lexell. I said it was. They asked if I had by chance given up a child for adoption who was born on February 10th, 1988. I said I did. I turned to my husband and then looked back at the phone, and the voice on the other end said, I have reason to believe I'm that child. My husband whispered, tell her we've been waiting for her call. You see, after I gave up my child for adoption, I had put out searches for her, hoping that one day when she was 18, we could reconnect. But in this moment, all I asked her was, did you have a good childhood, and were you loved? She said I was. And then I explained to her over the course of many, many conversations that had I not given her up when I gave her up, she would have been a victim of violence and poverty, and she would have had an uneducated mother. But instead, she came into my life at just the right time, and that there must have been some sort of divine providence that brought us back together. Today, I am happy to report that Shelby Lynn has a place in my life, and she is my daughter. I don't take the place of her mother. She has one of those. I gave that gift freely and willingly. But she has me, her birth mother, and her birth father has accepted her with wide open arms. So I released her in 1988. But in 2010, I caught her with open arms, and we've redefined what it means to be family. And I have found that Valentine's Day again, because my heart has come back.